because it is World Refrigeration Day. See what I did there? Refrigeration is the process of removing heat from an enclosed space or from a substance for the purpose of lowering the temperature. So, refrigeration technologies that we use every day are our AC units, the heat pump sector, and of course, refrigerators. Today, we're going to focus on refrigerators. We use our fridge for food preservation by lowering the temperatures to slow down the growth of bacteria that spoils our food. This is achieved through two basic principles in science. When liquid evaporates, it absorbs heat, making the area cold, and when liquid condenses, it releases heat. The fridge has 5 components: an expansion device, an evaporator coil, compressor, condenser coil, and refrigerant. The refrigerant, in a liquid state, flows through the evaporator coil where it turns into a gas. As it changes states, it absorbs heat, turning the area in the fridge cold. It then flows into the compressor, which adds pressure. When pressure is added, the temperature of the gas increases, so that it becomes a hot gas, which flows into the condenser coil. As it passes through the condenser coils, it cools down, giving off heat into the environment outside of the fridge, and the refrigerant returns to a liquid. It then passes through the expansion device to repeat this process. However, our fridges require electricity, and that wasn't common in the early households. So what did they use before electricity? Food was preserved by drying, salting, smoking, or pickling it. They also used the natural surroundings to keep their food cool, such as putting jars in freezing lakes or streams, using snow and ice, or keeping it in cool cellars. I think most civilizations had a storage pit in the ground that used the coolness of the earth to preserve their food. The Romans, Greeks, and Hebrews used this method, and so did the settlers on the prairie lands. In the prairies, they were called ice houses because the settlers would store ice that they collected from the ice on their dugouts, sloughs, and any nearby lakes. They would use special saws to cut the ice into blocks that they could store in the ice house through the summer. Like the Romans, Greeks, and Hebrews, the ice houses used straw or sawdust as an insulator to keep the ice cool for as long as possible. The pioneers would store their food in the ice house until the invention of an ice box. Ice boxes were often made of wood and lined with tin or zinc. Just like the ice houses, they could be insulated with sawdust or cork or even seaweed. In the ice box, there is a compartment for an ice block, which was the source that kept the food cool. This was changed every 2 to 3 days because it would melt and drip into a pan below that had to be emptied. The ice houses were still used to store the ice blocks used in the ice box, and in cities they even had an iceman that would deliver ice blocks to the homes. The ice box was a turning point because instead of going to the ice house every meal, you only had to go every 2 to 3 days to collect a new block. Like many inventions, multiple people contributed to the development of the refrigerator. First was William Cullen, a Scottish doctor, that demonstrated the cooling effects of rapid evaporation in 1748. But he never applied this discovery. However, other scientists and inventors would use this in their own designs. In 1805, American inventor Oliver Evans built a refrigeration machine that didn't use liquid, but vapor. This was the first of its kind, but Evans also never built it. A similar model was constructed by John Gorey, an American physician, in 1844. A vapor compression refrigeration machine was invented by Jacob Perkins in 1834, and Alexander C. Twining introduced commercial refrigeration in 1856, which John Harrison applied to the brewing and meat industries. In France, Ferdinand Carré was an engineer that used ammonia instead of air as a coolant. However, if this substance leaked, it was really toxic. And while a version of Carey's methods are still used today, the change from ammonia to Freon was made in the 1920s because it is less toxic. In 1913, Fred W. Wolf made the first electric refrigerator sold by Domellery, and this name came because it's a shortened version of domestic electric refrigerator. And that was mounted on top of an icebox. Motor tops were another refrigerator that were made by General Electric in 1927. Motor tops were loud and chunky. It was successful due to its affordability, though, and excellent marketing. As you can imagine, the first refrigerators cost a lot of money. they would have cost anywhere between $500 to $1,000. But that was back then. Today, that price would be more like $6,000 to $13,000. So they weren't very popular because they were quite expensive. That's why they didn't become common until around the 1920s or the 1930s, when the cost came down a little bit. In fact, the motor top itself cost $300, but they sold units through local utilities by adding $10 to the monthly electric bill. This marketing strategy helped make refrigerators more common in the average household. Eventually, fridges got quieter, like the fridges we have today, and other features that we see in our fridges today were also added. The freezer compartment, for example, which was introduced in 1940s. They also added the water dispenser in the 1980s and internet connecting fridges. In 2000, LG produced an internet connected fridge that was unsuccessful due to the steep price and consumers feeling that it was unnecessary. However, today consumers may feel a little differently about that feature. We have come a long way in our refrigeration and food preservation, and yet we still use some of the same practices that were used many years ago. For more information, check out these sources. Thank you for joining us today on learning a little bit more about refrigeration, and as always, be sure to check out the Whitewood Historical Museum.